Welcome everybody to our latest CYF podcast for SCBA. And we're doing things a little bit differently this time because I'm actually in person chatting with a young person called Zoe. So thanks, Zoe, for joining us. And we're going to be just hearing a little bit about her perspective, her experiences, maybe in school, and all of her thoughts around faith, church, and that kind of thing. So thanks for joining us, Zoe.
It's okay.
And I know that you can't speak on behalf of a generation because that would be just ridiculous, but I'm really interested in what you're noticing and what your kind of thoughts are. Now, when I was at school, having a faith or being like connected with like Christianity was a little bit embarrassing, and not many people kind of chatted about it. I know that your upbringing has been within the faith. Is there still that sort of embarrassment at schools, or is it different?
I think at first, like lower years, I didn't really talk about it much. Like it wasn't something that we would talk about necessarily. But I feel like when I came to Regen and when I went to the youth group, I was like, oh, like there's people my age who are the same. And so I didn't really necessarily talk about it loads, but I didn't like not talk about it anymore. So it kind of started to come out a little bit more. And it definitely has come out a little bit more recently too, throughout lockdown, I guess. But we have started a multifaith group in school.
Yeah.
We have started a multifaith room in school. So that is just a space that people can come and pray in, and people can just chill and just be at peace with themselves, I guess.
So you've said absolutely loads there, so I'm going to have to rewind and we're going to unpack some of the things that you said. So you mentioned Regen, which I know is the Sunday morning youth group where you do Bible stuff, but I also know that they do just loads of discussions, loads of activities, and help young people explore faith. So that's run by a local church. And you said that helped you because you realised that there was maybe others that were sharing your faith or your worldview, and that was helpful for you. Can you tell us a little bit more about what role do you think youth groups can play in a young person's faith?
I think the youth group, instead of having like the children's work, which is a bit more like all these activities and stuff, and then the main like hall where everyone is, it's a bit more like for the youth group they just linked in things as a nowadays kind of scenarios. So we had like things that are happening in the news, and so we talk about that. So it just linked into like what everyday lives were. And I think that was really useful to have it like not just you go to youth group, then you shut the door, and then you just go and have like the rest of your week. It was a bit more like you go to youth group, you think about it, then like you do the rest of your week. But you also like think about it along the way. You'd be like, oh, we talked about things like that. And then you think about it because you see that on the way to school or something like that.
So actually the linking it in with your context and your experiences, so linking God, faith, the Bible into that was really important. So what sort of lessons do you think ministers and the church as a whole might learn from that? Because maybe that doesn't always happen in the other spaces on a Sunday.
I think maybe having like in the main service, just maybe linking it more to an everyday kind of aspect, and having just a little bit to take away with you and see just throughout the week. Because I think it is a bit more like, oh, here you go, think about it during the week. And you could also add to the service like, oh, this has happened, this is linking in with what we've said. And then you go out and you be like, oh, I've seen this, and oh, I've done this, and it linked with what we did in the service. So it's a bit more involved throughout the week instead of just involved in that hour or so.
Yeah, sure. No, I love that. I think that's a really important challenge that you've given to us, that we actually always bear in mind the context of the people that we're kind of connecting with and we're talking to. And I love the way that you've been able to sort of take some of that stuff, like walking to school and pondering it and all that kind of thing. And I really like that kind of reality. So then you sort of talked about how actually it was okay to maybe talk a little bit about faith in school. And what do you notice, like, with your peers? Is there people sort of talk about you being quite a open generation to spirituality and faith? Do you see that in your mates?
I think myself, so my friendship group is quite big, so we've got like a number of people, and obviously we're all different. And only recently I found out that a few of them are Christian, and I had no idea. And it just came out because we had the Multifaith room, and I was like, oh, I'm just gonna go into the Multifaith room, I'll be back later. They'll be like, oh, what's that about? And so I explained it, and they were like, oh, I'm Christian, I'd like to look at that, or oh, I'm Christian, I'd like to do something with it or be involved. And I think it was a bit more like, it wasn't that I brung up the conversation, but it was like the Multifaith room helped these conversations be formed.
Sure.
And the relationship kind of expand.
Yeah, sometimes you do need that sort of thing to hang it on, don't you, in that way?
Yeah.
Give you a reason to talk about it, because you can't be something like having your lunch and drop into conversation like the God bomb, like, you know, like. So what do you guys think? So I was really interested. We was just chatting one day, weren't we? And you had talked about how actually your mates do have a faith, but they don't necessarily go to church. And it wasn't even that they went to anything, but they kind of discovered God for themselves, or kind of in their own space, in their own time. I just thought that was so fascinating. You talked about churches maybe a bit in brackets, and that it's not necessarily, and young people don't necessarily see that as an important part of their faith and how it helps them to have faith and faith to develop. Do you see what I'm saying? Well, tell us some more about that.
I understand. So I feel like the older generation was a bit more, you're Christian, you go to church, black and white, you're good. Whereas I think nowadays there's a lot of things going on, and there's a lot more in our lives at a younger age that we also need to take into account, that we have things to do and places to be. And so I think church nowadays, the younger generation, most people who don't go to church see it as like a quiet place that you just pray, and then you sing a couple hymns, and then you go home. And I think that's kind of why a lot of my generation don't go to church, but they're still Christian because they do believe in it, but they don't want to go and sing a hymn and then walk home, because it's not going to impact them in any way, and it's not going to shape them. So that is one way, but there have been other ways. So I was talking to one of my friends, and she was like, yeah, I'm Christian, I read the Bible, I pray a lot, I just don't see the point in going to church because it's not my thing. And I was like, what do you mean about that? And she was like, it's not going to impact me in any way, it's not going to shape me, and so I just don't understand what's the point, like what would you do there? So I explained that I go to the youth group, and sometimes we do activities on a Saturday, and sometimes we hang out later in the evening. And she was a bit like, oh, like, so you hang out just like a group of friends, you just talk like a group of friends, and it's just easy to get along with. And I was like, yeah. And she was a bit more encouraged and wanting to come. And so I think that was really important, the fact that she actually changed her aspect on churches just because of what she's heard before and what she's hearing now, and the differences between them. And I feel like some people are Christian and don't want to go to church, and that's absolutely okay, but maybe we could change some of them and have Christians that do come to church and they realise that it's different, and then actually want to come to church. Because I feel like my generation don't want to come to church because of the fact that they view church in a boring way. And that's kind of the reason why they don't come.
Which kind of ties in with your previous point of actually they don't see the relevance of it, and you're saying actually you enjoy the youth group because it's relevant to your context. So there is a bit of a PR problem in that people don't realise that actually there might be something relevant that's being said there in that way, and actually so they see it more like the building rather than the community, that kind of, or the church family that is church, but actually they see it as something that you go to. No, so I think that's really interesting, that kind of helping people get over that hurdle and the desire for a relationship. You're sort of saying, actually, when you talk to them that we're hanging out and we're chatting, actually that's appealing. But actually, sometimes the church doesn't come across as a place of relationship, and because it's seen as we're just all sat in rows and all this kind of thing, and so it doesn't have that kind of community feel to it, which is a real shame because we know that it can be so much more than that. And you've mentioned several times this interfaith room, and is that quite unusual for schools, do you think? Tell me about how that developed.
So for a couple of years now, we've been saying, let's get a multi-faith room, let's get somewhere where people are able to express themselves and pray, but we've never really had the right space to do it. So this term we've got the multi-faith room, and it's a really nice space. It's quite bland at the moment because we didn't want to put too many things, because we want the students to come and do it themselves. Okay. So it's a way to lead them into it. So on the open evening we had it open, so for the new year we'll be able to show it around and be fully open. It's still in the process of opening, so everyone knows, but most people know at the moment. When on the open evening we had a lot of families come and they really enjoyed it, and I haven't actually seen any other schools do it, but I've read the parents, so they did say never seen this before, it's really good. So I think it's quite a nice thing to have if you're like new to the school and you're a bit like, I don't know where to pray, I'd quite like to right now, or like I don't know where to just think. So it's quite a nice place to just go and just be there instead of like being around everyone and it being really busy.
Yeah, and I remember doing pause, the prayer spaces in your school, and I always remember the students sort of saying, oh, we never get the chance to just be, so this is like a really great place to be. And I suppose it's a bit of a continuation in the sense of you've created a space where pupils and students and teachers can just be. And I know that there was some, I was chatting to someone, they were observing the discussion between those with the Muslim faith and those with the Christian faith, and sometimes there were literally sort of where the Christians wanted something to inspire them, some of the Muslims were like saying, well, actually that's the distraction for us in our faith. And so this real negotiation and compromise as to how that space can be. So I totally get why it might be a bit bland, but allowing the students to be able to create it for themselves. I mean, lots of skills involved for you in having those sort of negotiations, I suppose.
Yeah, no, it's really good. We have thought about that because we do have some Muslims in our school, and so it's quite hard to have, when people wanted loads of colour and loads of photos and stuff, then obviously you can't have that when you're praying if you're Muslim. And so we have this kind of bookshelf, so it has like little folders and stuff, so you're able to, when you're praying, like open it, or like colour and stuff, so you can take it out and do it, but also put it back so it's out the way for others.
Okay, so actually you genuinely can create the space in the moment.
Yeah.
That's cool, I like that. And what did it teach you about God, having to sort of think through what for you would be important, but also bearing other faiths in mind?
I think it was kind of like, I don't know.
Is that a big question?
Yeah.
It's okay. I can ask another one. Shall I ask another one? I've always really, I think, admired your generation in the sense of you're really able to own what your truth is, like your belief, but allow others to believe something different. And I think that's something really special. Can you reflect on that? Would you say that's an accurate observation, or have I been a bit idealistic?
Yeah, no, I think it is good. I think over lockdown, because we have had a lot of changes and we've been growing throughout that lockdown with the changes, we have been kind of like easier to live with differences between people. And I feel like that multi-faith room kind of was our imagery of that, and everything that was in our heads was put towards that room, and so it kind of gave you the difference, but it also put it all together. So we could be together but just be different at the same time.
Yeah, I love it. So there's unity in our differences as well, and recognising that each faith, it obviously has distinctives, and we've got distinctives in how we understand Jesus and what he accomplished and has enabled for us. But I love that there isn't that sense of having to impose that or defend it in some sort of way, but you just accept what you believe and accept what others do and stuff. So, but do your mates ever have like majorly like discussions which are kind of a bit more on the argumentative side, or actually is it just a real sense of being able to listen to each other's beliefs and values?
So I think it is a bit more. Well, so we had a meeting for preparing for the Multifaith room, and a couple of the people in the committee are Muslim and a couple of people are Christian. So there were obviously a bit more concerns about having them both put together and how it's going to be ideal. So we did have a bit of discussions about colours and photographs, but we do come to resolutions, and it's quite easy to come to resolutions because everyone's always willing to put ideas in. And yes, we can have your idea, we can have your idea when you're here, and then you can put it away for someone else's idea to come in.
Yeah. So there seems to be a real tolerance, a real collaborative aspect to your generation, which is, I think it's really can teach us a lot in that way. Is there, if you were, people that are listening in might be children from families, workers, might be ministers, might be obviously your mum and your dad, and other people from church and things like that, but what is anything you would like them to hear from your generation? Not that you can speak on behalf of generation, I get that.
I think being a bit more like, instead of being a bit more like, come to church, like everyone come to church, come, it's a bit more like, this is what we do at church, like if you'd like to come, but it's not like how you think. I think change the imagery of what people imagine church is like, and it will encourage people rather than telling them to come and they still have the same image in their mind. And so I think that sets people back a bit, and then it keeps the barrier between us and them. And I feel like if you open that barrier and you explain what happens and what we do instead of just giving them the invitation, you want to give them the invitation, but you also want to give them like the helping hand to pull them across. You kind of want to give them everything instead of just one thing. So I think that's something we need to focus on, is changing the imagery before opening the invitation out fully.
Okay, so actually be confident in who we are as a church in that way, if we are relational and if we are all those kind of things. Suddenly had a little panic then that I wasn't recording. And so be confident in who we are, and actually maybe if we're just a bit more out there with that, then people will see, rather than it being like this, which actually the online stuff has enabled people to do, hasn't it? They can sort of dip in and see, but actually all they're probably seeing isn't the community, they're just seeing one person talking, which is probably not the best sales pitch.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm with you. I had another thought that I wanted to ask you about. So your generation has kind of been tended to be known for its like heart for justice and the environment, inclusion, all that kind of thing, which is brilliant. What are your reflections on how the church engages with those sort of justice issues?
I think, I'm not sure in the main service because I'm usually not there because I'm in the youth group, but I think in the youth group we have talked about those main issues in the world, and it has kind of made us think a little bit differently, because yes, like we see it in the news and we're a bit like, that's bad, right, I'm just gonna go do something else. And like I feel like we think about it a bit more and we're able to have the discussion and we're able to see other people's views and aspects, and I think that's really important. But we also don't just talk about it, we do stuff about it. So we've done a couple of things. So what else did we do? We did stuff for the homeless. That was an activity that we did, and it went really well. We also did stuff on recycling and waste. And I think doing the creative side, but also having a discussion side, kind of put everyone's like initiatives together and put everyone's ideas together to create something that is able to be seen by everyone.
Yeah, so for those of you that can't picture this, but I know that you very much, there was discussion, but I know the team is quite creative in how they deliver some of that stuff, and so there was quite a playfulness about it, and then there was always things that could be seen by the wider church so they could learn from what you guys had been discovering in that way, which is really, I like that kind of the creative, the playful, the discursive aspects to I suppose the way that the learning takes place within Regen in that way. So your faith to me seems like it's very kind of much more active rather than it just being a head kind of thing. So what would your thinking be around faith and like head knowledge and heart experience, and then it leading to something that is active? Have you got any sort of reflections on that? Is some easier than others?
I think personally for me, I don't really, well, I do think about things a lot, but I much rather do instead of just sit and think. So I think also having the opportunity to be active and doing all these things, but then also having the opportunity to think about it. So I think having both together is really good rather than having one, because I think if I just had like a thinking space and that's all I was doing, I think I'd be put off a little bit. And so I think having the opportunity to change it up a little bit and just have kind of like a difference, so just not be the same every single time is really helpful. And I think that also makes your mind focus a lot more when they have a change to be put on.
Yeah, so actually you're without knowing it probably, but you're talking much more about a reflective approach in the sense of actually our thinking comes out of what we do, but our doing informs our thinking, and there's that kind of conversation that happens between the two in that way. And what do you think about the heart stuff? Because often we talk about a relationship with Jesus, or like, you know, loving God with everything that we've got and all that kind of stuff, or do you think actually the doing stuff is kind of where you're at much more?
I think myself, I'm a bit more the doing stuff, but I think the youth group has really helped you not change but adapt and grow throughout those different aspects. And I think at first I was a bit over here, and now I'm like growing out into all these aspects, and I think it's really helpful because someone might be in another place, and so we kind of come together and we help one another. And I think that's how groups are really important, and having small groups are really important, because then you're able to put all your attention towards that small group instead of putting it towards someone, but then that one person is towards everyone. So they can't give you the attention. So I think having the one-on-ones or the small groups are really important to help your growth as well. And
brilliant. No, thank you. It's been really, really lovely chatting to you, and really interesting to hear your reflections on stuff. And I've just like you've given so much good advice, really, in terms of if churches are listening, to think about actually what is our kind of communication, but not just in the youth group, because actually one day you're not going to be in the youth group, but if the adult gathering is very different to the young people's gathering, then actually that's going to be quite tricky, isn't it? Because you're not going to change. You're going to still want it to be interactive, and for there to be like a doing element to it, and that kind of thing, and for there to be really relational. So I think it's some really healthy challenges for us. So thanks so much for sharing, and you've done really well, because I know this was like we didn't really plan any of this. You've answered off the top of your head. That's really scary, but you've been amazing, and it's been really. I love the way that image you had of it's basically of flourishing. That actually, if you give somebody lots of different spaces in which they can grow, the one-to-ones, the small group, the bigger group, then actually God can do amazing things, and he'll do amazing things in and through you. So thank you for your willingness to serve him in your school, in that kind of interfaith, multi-faith prayer space or room. That's really wonderful. So I look forward to seeing how it develops.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening, and we'll join us next month.